Good afternoon and welcome to the Copernicus Climate Change and Atmosphere Monitoring Press Briefing on the Climate Summary of 2021. My name is Dr. Samantha Burgess and I am Deputy Director of the Copernicus Climate Change Service, or C3S, and your moderator for this afternoon's webinar. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping information. This is a Zoom webinar. In case you run into any technical difficulties, please reach out to the technical support or Copernicus press team. We're recording this webinar. However, no personal information will be displayed. The presentation will be made publicly available, but the Q&A will not be, to comply with GDPR rules. I would now like to introduce Mario Facchini, the Head of Unit for Earth Observation for DEFIS, to give some opening words.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I'm very happy to give some introductory words. So first of all, good afternoon to everyone. And before entering into the real topic of today, so climate change, atmosphere, and so on, please let me recall a bit of the overall context. So with the approval in 2021 of an EU budget of 5.4 billion euros for Copernicus, the EU Earth Observation Programme is operational and ensure until 2028. We will continue to trust and count on the technical excellence of ECMWF to run measurements, notably linked to the atmosphere quality and to climate change. We acknowledge the excellent work done by ECMWF in running this part of the Copernicus program until now, and we count on them for a continued provision of information. Why an EU program like Copernicus is investing so much in monitoring climate change and atmosphere? The EU is currently working to build a greener, more digital and more resilient Europe. The Copernicus program, and in particular its environmental part, constitutes an important tool to implement the Union's Green Deal policies as one of the von der Leyen Commission's priorities. The Green Deal policies address a number of policy areas aimed at increasing the sustainability of human activities and the healthiness of our environment, areas like biodiversity, farm to fork, sustainable finance, sustainable industry, mobility, zero pollution, and so on and so on. Almost all these policy areas affect or are affected by climate change. So this is clearly one of the key policies in the Green Deal package. Without understanding how our climate is changing and the risk that these changes will bring, we cannot plan for a climate resilient future. The 2021 climate analysis released today shows that globally the warmest years ever recorded were in the last 7 years. 2021 was the 5th warmest year on record, with emissions continuing to increase. The urgency of climate action has never been more important. The Copernicus Climate and Atmosphere Monitoring Services, called C3S and CAMS, already support Europe's climate efforts by providing data and information that underpin climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. C3S gives access to state-of-the-art reanalysis products, which combine millions of in situ and satellite observations with model outputs to produce maps without gaps, able to describe the state of the atmosphere and the ocean for every place on the planet at any hour from 1950 to present. Both C3S and CAMS contribute to the body of evidence that informs important publications for policymakers, such as the latest IPCC assessment reports. Thanks to the Copernicus free and open data access policy, anyone can make use of the Copernicus satellite and in situ observations, models, and other products about past, present, and future climate and transform it into useful insights for climate resilience. Users from all over the world do exactly that via the Copernicus Climate and Atmosphere data stores. All European countries need to drive down carbon emissions, and this is an undeniably tough undertaking. But data from the Copernicus services, such as C3S and CAMS, funded by the EU, can play an important role to inform mitigation efforts and demonstrate progress towards net zero. Beyond the continuation of the measurements of current parameters, the Copernicus program is planning to evolve with the possibility to observe CO2 anthropogenic emissions. To this end, Copernicus will deploy new satellites for CO2 observations and the corresponding modeling capacities that will be the first worldwide to monitor man-made CO2 emissions in support of the UNFCCC climate agreement. And with this, I hand back to you, Samantha, and ECMWF colleagues for more details on the 2021 results of C3S. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. I would now like to introduce Dr. Freya Vanborg, a senior scientist at C3S, to introduce the main findings of the 2021 climate summary.
Yes, thank you, and hello everyone. I will start by sharing my screen. Sam, can you please confirm that you see the presentation?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. So again, welcome to everyone. This will be a brief overview of the Copernicus 2021 annual summary, which has been put together by the Copernicus Climate Change Service and the Atmosphere Monitoring Services. So we'll start with some of the kind of key highlights of last year. So if we look at temperatures for the globe, as already stated, the 7 last years were the warmest on record. And among those, 2021 ranks as one of the cooler. In our data set, it's 5th, but it's only marginally warmer than 2015 and 2018. If we look to Europe, which is one of our main regions for monitoring, it was just above the 1991 to 2020 average and outside the warmest 10 years on record. But with that, one should remember that the last 30 years, which is our new reference period, already contain a large amount of warming since the pre-industrial. And even though maybe the year as a whole wasn't that remarkable, the summer was the warmest summer in Europe on record for Europe, with quite an intense heat wave in the Mediterranean region during late July, early August, when a new maximum temperature record was likely reached in Sicily of 48.8 degrees Celsius. So this record is still to be confirmed by the World Meteorological Organization, so such is not yet a complete official record compared to the record before, which was 0.8 degrees cooler. And coming back to the global level, concentrations of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane have continued to rise during 2021, and especially the growth rate during 2021 for methane was particularly high, which was also the case actually for the year prior to that, so 2020. And I will go into a little bit more detail and also some explanations behind the findings. And we'll start with greenhouse gases and atmospheric carbon dioxide. And what you see here is measurements derived from satellites. So it's important to note that whilst satellite measurements of carbon dioxide and methane are comparable to those measurements that one might be more familiar with at the surface, there is a slight difference in the actual values, just simply because the satellite measurements take into account the whole atmospheric column, so from the surface up until the top of the atmosphere and the concentrations within those, whereas of course surface measurements are exactly that, measurements at the surface. But what you see at the top curve is the concentrations, and you see the typical kind of seasonal variability within each year, with CO2 concentrations generally peaking during springtime, boreal springtime. And as you can see, these have been continued to grow during last year. And looking then at the bottom graph, where we see the growth rates, so by how much did the concentrations grow within that year, we see that the level lies, based on this preliminary analysis, on around 2.4 ppm per year, which is quite similar to what was seen in 2020 as well, and also kind of quite close to the general average for the last decade or so, but a lot lower, for instance, than the growth rates during 2015 and 2016. If we then go to methane, it's the same type of, well, same idea. Also measurements from satellites. At the top, you see the concentrations and how they've grown over the last year. And again, in the bottom graphic, the growth rate for methane. And there you can see that compared to the last 2 decades or so, the growth rates of the last two years have been relatively high. These are, of course, still preliminary numbers, but they're also corroborated by other preliminary numbers for 2021. But there is still quite a big, scientific discussion of why those rates have been so high, and this is an ongoing analysis, mainly due to the fact that the range of sources for methane is very large, and there are both human and natural sources of methane, and to disentangle that, it requires further analysis. If we then move on to surface air temperatures for the globe, just wanted to show this time series, which shows the increase in temperature over the last 40 years or so. And what you can see on the left-hand axis is the increase above the 1850 to 1900 reference level. So what is the period which is typically referred to as the pre-industrial. And 2021 was around 1.1 to 1.2 degrees above that level. On the right-hand side of this graphic, you also see the global temperature in relation to the latest 30-year period. And there you can clearly see that the last 30 years, they were well above the pre-industrial temperature, as we all know, with global warming, around 0.9 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial. And I think that's important to keep in mind for the remainder of what we're going to see. But what I also want to point out is the red bars represent the data set that we are producing and upon which these figures are based. But of course, there are other data sets for global temperature, and which as a key variable is important to also keep those other data sets in mind, which is why we decided to show them here. So you can see these little dots kind of indicate the typical spread between these data sets. And that's also why we think that even though with this data set, 2021 ranks 5th, it's quite likely that it will have another rank, but possibly 6th or 7th in other data sets, but that still remains to be seen. Now moving on to the next picture, I wanted to remember this right-hand side graphic of the temperature relative to 1991 to 2020, because we look at the year as a whole of the globe compared to that reference period. We can see that some regions, those in red, were warmer than that average, and some regions were cooler than that average. Those are the blue ones. So the ones to maybe point out in terms of being specifically warm was the parts of US and Canada, but especially the northeast of Canada and Greenland, also some regions over Africa and the Middle East. Whereas if we look at below average temperatures, some of the ones with the largest, what we call anomalies, so differences from the average, were across easternmost Russia and Alaska, also parts of Western Siberia, and also parts of Antarctica. And of course, also in the central Eastern Pacific, due to the waning La Nina that started in 2020, so at the start of 2021, and the re-emergence of a La Nina later in the year. Now, just to mention a number of key events of 2021, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but mainly focuses on those events that we have highlighted or especially looked at during 2021 in terms of temperature, other climates, and also fire monitoring from the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service. So one really of the kind of key events of last year was the exceptional heat wave in the US and Canada, so in northwestern North America during June, where temperature records were broken by quite some degrees. It also resulted in the warmest June on record for the whole of North America, and the hot but also very dry conditions that kind of persisted throughout a lot of the year. So the dry conditions into summer and during summer, of course, exacerbated the wildfire season with quite a number of intense wildfires in the region during summer. Wildfires in general, where they were the most, say, extreme, were in parts of Siberia, with some regions seeing record-breaking amounts of carbon emissions from wildfires. So this is one way of measuring wildfire activity. And then we focus on Europe. One notable event was the late season frosts in Western Europe. So this might not seem like such a notable event, but what happened was that in parts of Europe, March was relatively warm. So to have this late season frost meant that quite a lot of agricultural produce that had started its growing season then was heavily affected. In July, there was, of course, the very heavy rainfall and flooding event in Central Europe. So with heavy rainfall falling on already saturated soils in parts, and leading to really devastating flooding in Central Europe. And then finally, what I mentioned also at the beginning, is an extreme heat wave during July and August in the Mediterranean region, where there was a likely new European maximum temperature record of 48.8 degrees Celsius. And also here, the dry and hot conditions were conducive to a very active wildfire season across the Mediterranean region. And that's all I wanted to highlight in this very brief presentation, and we're ready to take your questions. And I just want to leave you with some links, so to the press kit, where you can find a lot of additional information about how the data set were put together, also all the graphics, etc., in high resolution, and other materials such as videos and so on. If you should have any press inquiries after this briefing, then please contact Copernicus-press@ecmwf.int. And here are a number of other useful links that you might want to consult either today or in following our activities in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Freya.